In the vast universe of Warhammer 40,000, commerce is rarely simple and even less often legitimate. While the Imperium of man projects an image of rigid order, complete regulation, and divine authority, the truth beneath that facade is much messier. Humanity's empire spans millions of worlds, each one layered with its own hierarchies, cultures, and survival mechanisms. In such an immense and fractured civilization, it is inevitable that a shadow economy thrives. These are the black markets of the 41st millennium, hidden networks of exchange that provide what the Imperium cannot or will not supply. To understand the nature of these markets, one must first appreciate the realities of daily life in the Imperium. For most citizens, existence is defined by scarcity, bureaucracy, and oppression. Food, medicine, and even basic tools are tightly rationed, distributed through official channels riddled with inefficiency. The Adeptus Administratum, with its endless paperwork and Byzantine layers of authority, ensures that only those who know how to manipulate the system or those willing to pay the right bribes can access what they need. In such a climate, it is no wonder that black markets emerge as a vital lifeline. They are not merely spaces of greed and indulgence, but also of survival. At the most basic level, these markets often deal in food. Hive cities, towering metropolises housing billions, are notorious for their shortages. Workers toiling in manufactorums cannot always rely on sanctioned rations, which are often stale, contaminated, or insufficient. Smugglers and gangs step in, providing everything from illegally imported nutrient paste to rare delicacies from distant agri-worlds. For many, this trade is not about luxury, but about avoiding starvation. Yet, the deeper one descends into the underbelly of hive society, the stranger and more dangerous these goods become. Weapons are among the most heavily trafficked items. The Imperium claims a monopoly on arms production, with entire forge worlds dedicated to supplying the Astra Militarum and Adeptus Astartes. Civilian access to weaponry is highly restricted. But in a galaxy where Xenos raids, heretical uprisings, and gang wars are constant threats, the demand for firepower never diminishes. Black markets answer this need, offering everything from homemade stub pistols to stolen lace guns, and in rare cases even experimental archaeotech scavenged from battlefields. Entire gangs rise and fall based on their ability to control these illicit weapon trades. The Imperium's enforcers fight an endless, losing battle against this flow of arms, but the deeper truth is that many of them are complicit, taking bribes to look the other way or even selling confiscated weapons back into circulation. Drugs and stims form another major category of contraband. Life in the Imperium is brutal, and the average worker may spend 14 to 16 hours a day in a polluted factory environment. In such conditions, the appeal of chemical relief is undeniable. From Obscura, a hallucinogen that offers escape from grim reality, to combat stims designed to sharpen reflexes and suppress fear, narcotics saturate the hidden economy. These substances are often tied to the activities of chaos cults, who use them to lure vulnerable souls into darker forms of corruption. What begins as a desperate attempt to forget misery can spiral into addiction, madness, and eventual damnation. Thus, the black market does not merely undermine imperial law, it feeds the enemies of mankind. The rarest and most dangerous trade, however, is in knowledge. The Imperium tightly controls information, branding unapproved texts as heretical and punishing curiosity with death. Yet humans have always hungered for understanding, and forbidden lore moves quietly among smugglers and scribes. A single scrap of Xenos technology, a half-burned data slate of ancient, standard, template constructs, or even a dog-eared book of pre-imperial philosophy can fetch fortunes in the right circles. Those who deal in such artifacts walk a razor's edge. To the Inquisition, possession of such materials is a sign of heresy, punishable by summary execution. Yet, for certain rogue traders, nobles, or even ambitious planetary governors, these secrets are worth the risk. The black market, then, becomes not merely a place of barter, but a breeding ground for ideas that could topple empires. To grasp the scale of these illicit economies, one must also understand the geography of imperial society. Hive cities, with their billions of residents and sprawling underhives, are the most fertile ground. The higher levels may be tightly policed, but the deeper one descends, the less control the Imperium maintains. Down there, law is defined by whoever has the most guns, and trade is the only constant. In void stations, where supplies from distant worlds must be distributed, corruption thrives. Dock workers and customs officials are easily bribed to misplace cargo, and entire crates of weapons or medicine can vanish into hidden compartments. Even frontline war zones teem with black markets, where soldiers barter stolen munitions or food for favors, often under the indifferent gaze of their commanders. Crucially, these networks are not isolated. Smuggling routes span entire star systems, facilitated by rogue traders, mercenaries, and pirates. Rogue traders, with their unique licenses to operate beyond imperial law, often blur the line between legitimate commerce and black market profiteering. They can move alien technology, heretical artifacts, or restricted war material across the stars with little oversight, provided they maintain plausible deniability. Pirates raid supply convoys and then sell their stolen goods back to desperate worlds. Even some planetary governors knowingly permit these operations, using them to maintain order when imperial tithes leave their populations on the edge of collapse. The black markets of the 41st millennium, then, are not merely dens of criminality. They are woven into the very fabric of imperial survival. They sustain billions who would otherwise starve. They provide weapons to those who must defend themselves when the Emperor's armies are slow to arrive. They allow forbidden knowledge to circulate, sometimes dooming worlds, sometimes sparking innovation. And they exist in a constant dance with imperial authority, tolerated where convenient, crushed when they grow too bold, and always lurking in the shadows. As we move deeper into this exploration, it becomes clear that the black market is not just a single phenomenon, but a spectrum of activity ranging from the mundane to the catastrophic. It reflects the failures of imperial bureaucracy, the desperation of its citizens, and the unending lure of profit in a galaxy built on war. To truly grasp its significance, we must look closer at the human element, the gangs, smugglers, rogue traders, and desperate citizens who keep these shadow economies alive, and the institutions that alternately suppress and exploit them. That is where the story of Warhammer 40,000's black markets becomes not just an economic tale, but a deeply human one. If the black markets of the Imperium are shaped by scarcity, then they are defined in practice by the people who sustain them. At every level of society, from the lowliest worker to the highest noble, there exists someone who benefits from or relies on this hidden economy. To explore how these markets function, we must understand the human and, in some cases, inhuman actors behind them. Their motives vary: greed, survival, power, or simple defiance of imperial law. But collectively, they form the arteries and veins of an economy that the Imperium can neither fully destroy nor ever truly acknowledge. In the underhives, the most visible faces of black markets are gangs. These are not small street collectives, but sprawling organizations, sometimes numbering in the thousands, controlling entire levels of a hive city. They thrive in areas where imperial authority rarely reaches, and their power is measured not just in weapons, but in access to trade. Some gangs specialize in food distribution, smuggling crates of contraband grain or protein slurries down from upper levels. Others dominate the arms trade, selling scavenged or stolen weaponry to desperate locals. Still others build their identity around narcotics, using stims as both a currency and a leash on their customers. Within these groups, the black market becomes not just an economy, but a culture, a way of life passed down through generations in the shadows of the hive. Their leadership structures often resemble miniature empires. A gang lord sits at the top, flanked by lieutenants who oversee smuggling routes, collections, and enforcement. Beneath them are enforcers and traders, And at the bottom, the endless ranks of addicts, laborers, and desperate souls who have no choice but to buy in. What makes these gangs particularly resilient is their integration into daily survival. When the official rations are cut or delayed, it is the gangs who feed the hungry. When enforcers look the other way, it is because the gangs have already paid them to do so. And when Imperial officials attempt crackdowns, the gangs can vanish into the labyrinthine depths of the Underhive, where no authority dares follow. Beyond the gangs lie the smugglers. Smugglers form the connective tissue of black markets, bridging the gap between local needs and interstellar supply. Some operate small, barely functional shuttles, ferrying goods between hive spires or nearby void stations. Others are seasoned crews with entire ships dedicated to illicit trade, often running on modified engines designed to avoid detection. These men and women live dangerous lives. Every jump into the warp risks not only Imperial patrols, but also the attention of pirates, Chaos Raiders, or worse. Yet the profits are immense. A single crate of medical supplies, stolen from an administratum depot and delivered to a plague-stricken world, can make a smuggler wealthy for life, provided they live long enough to spend their earnings. Among smugglers, reputation is everything. A reliable crew can build networks across multiple star systems, becoming essential partners to rogue traders or planetary officials willing to look the other way. But betrayal is equally common. Deals sour quickly when desperation runs high, and it is not unusual for smugglers to vanish without a trace, their cargo stolen and their bodies discarded in the void. In this sense, smuggling is both the lifeblood and the constant risk of the black market, a profession as likely to end in glory as in oblivion. Above the level of smugglers and gangs, however, stand the rogue traders. These enigmatic figures are given charters by the Imperium itself, granting them legal authority to operate outside most Imperial laws. Their mandate is to expand human influence, seek out new resources, and maintain trade across the galaxy's uncharted edges. But in practice, many rogue traders straddle the line between legitimacy and outright criminality. Their vast vessels are often packed with relics, alien artifacts, and forbidden technologies, some of which they sell openly to the Imperium, others of which they funnel into the black market for enormous profit. Rogue traders are often aristocrats, but their fortunes depend less on bloodline than on boldness. To deal in contraband at their level is to gamble with more than wealth. It is to risk the scrutiny of the Inquisition. Still, their role in sustaining black markets cannot be overstated. They provide the exotic goods that gangs, smugglers, and nobles alike crave: Xenos weapons, relics from dead civilizations, or fragments of ancient, standard template constructs. In a galaxy where forbidden knowledge is both the most dangerous and the most valuable currency, rogue traders act as gatekeepers, ensuring that this knowledge never fully dies, even if its dissemination carries terrible consequences. Yet, not all who profit from these markets are outsiders. The imperial institutions themselves often play a role. The Adeptus Arbites, the feared enforcers of imperial law, are tasked with rooting out criminal activity, but their focus is primarily on threats to imperial authority. A starving worker buying food on the black market may be ignored, while a gang suspected of chaos worship will be exterminated without hesitation. In many cases, Arbites officials are bribed to protect certain trade networks, ensuring that contraband continues to flow in exchange for coin. Similarly, elements of the Astra Militarum have been known to participate, particularly on long campaigns where soldiers barter rations, weapons, or medical supplies for personal advantage. Planetary governors and nobles are perhaps the most hypocritical participants. Publicly, they denounce the black markets as heretical and criminal. Privately, they often fund or rely on them. A governor struggling to meet the demands of imperial tithes may turn a blind eye to smuggling operations that keep his population fed. A noble may employ smugglers to acquire alien trinkets or rare narcotics for private indulgence. And in some cases, entire planetary economies operate on a dual system. the official tithe-bound economy visible to the Imperium, and the shadow economy that actually sustains the population. This duality highlights the uncomfortable truth of the black markets. They are both enemy and necessity. The Imperium cannot openly acknowledge them, for doing so would be to admit failure in governance and distribution. But it cannot eradicate them either, for they are woven into the survival of countless worlds. Instead, the Imperium maintains a posture of selective enforcement, cracking down when the markets become too visible or too dangerous, but otherwise allowing them to persist in the shadows. These complex relationships create an atmosphere of constant tension. Every transaction carries risk, every trade could be betrayal, and every bribe could be a trap. Yet they also reveal the ingenuity of humanity under the crushing weight of imperial rule. For every bureaucratic blockade, someone finds a workaround. For every scarcity imposed by tithe demands, someone discovers a way to profit. In this way, the black markets become not only a story of crime and corruption, but also a testament to human resilience, in a galaxy that offers little mercy. Having examined the actors who keep these networks alive, we must now turn our attention to the consequences of their existence. Black markets may sustain life, but they also spread corruption, empower dangerous forces, and often serve as gateways for the enemies of mankind. To understand their true danger, we must follow the threads of contraband beyond the transaction, into the impact it has on societies, armies, and the very survival of the Imperium itself. If the black markets of the Imperium are tolerated out of necessity, their costs are paid in blood, corruption, and instability. What begins as survival quickly festers into rot that undermines the Imperium from within. Every act of trade, every whispered exchange of contraband, carries consequences that ripple far beyond the hives and void stations where they occur. The first and most immediate consequence is the spread of narcotics. Stims and recreational drugs flood the underhives, sold not only as indulgences, but as tools of control. Entire districts of a hive city may collapse into addiction, their workers no longer fit for labor, their families fractured by dependency. When the Imperium calls for recruits, it finds men and women broken by the very substances that once kept them awake for long shifts at manufactoria lines. Worse still are substances of alien or heretical origin, powders distilled from xenos plants, elixirs laced with warp-tainted ingredients. These are not merely destructive to the body, they open the mind to whispers best left unheard. What may seem a harmless indulgence to a noble in his palace becomes a pathway for corruption when repeated 1,000 times across the stars. Beyond narcotics lies the question of knowledge. Information in the Imperium is power, strictly controlled, tightly hoarded, and often lethal to those unprepared to wield it. Yet in the black markets, fragments of prescribed texts, heretical treatises, and scraps of forbidden lore circulate freely. A tattered data slate, sold for a handful of credits in a hive alley, may contain remnants of ancient, standard template constructs. A stolen Mechanicus tome, traded by a rogue trader to a smuggler, can become the seed of a heretic cult bent on unraveling the mysteries of the machine. Even a sliver of a chaos scripture, copied and passed from hand to hand, can spark the birth of a cult that spreads like wildfire through the faithful. In this way, the black markets do not simply satisfy hidden hungers, they propagate them, ensuring that heresy is never truly stamped out. The impact extends to the Imperium's war machine. Armies cannot function without discipline and order, yet black markets corrode both. Guardsmen, weary of endless campaigns, trade away their rations, sell their laser guns, or barter stolen ammunition. Officers skim supplies to line their pockets, redirecting weapons to smugglers who sell them back to desperate civilians or to outright enemies. Campaigns that should have ended in imperial victory drag on as soldiers lack food, medicine, or trust in their chain of command. A single smuggler ring embedded in a war zone can doom entire regiments, all for the sake of private profit. Perhaps most dangerously, the black markets act as bridges to the Imperium's enemies. Chaos cults acquire weapons not from demonic forges, but from the same smugglers who feed starving workers. Orc raiders plunder a world, then sell scavenged technology back through human intermediaries, seeding future wars. Even the enigmatic Eldar and other Xenos races exploit these markets, using human greed to slip artifacts and weapons into circulation. Sometimes the cargo itself is the weapon, an alien relic that whispers to its new owner, or a shard of warp-tainted crystal that corrupts an entire noble household. The Imperium fights endlessly to defend its borders, yet within those borders, its own people invite the enemy inside. What emerges is a cycle without end. The Imperium requires black markets to sustain life in countless hives and frontier worlds. Without contraband food, millions would starve. Without illicit medicine, plagues would burn unchecked. Without smuggled ammunition, guardsmen would fall in droves. And yet, in feeding its people, the Imperium starves its armies. In preserving lives, it empowers heresy. In tolerating shadows, it courts damnation. The great paradox of the 41st millennium is that the Imperium's endurance rests not only on faith, bureaucracy, and war, but also on the hidden networks that erode all three. This uneasy balance forces the Imperium into a stance of selective blindness. Arbite's commanders may eradicate a cult while turning a blind eye to the food trade that sustains an entire hive level. Governors may denounce contraband in public while buying alien trinkets in private. Even inquisitors, sworn to root out heresy, may exploit these networks to further their own ends, relying on smugglers to move artifacts or spies undetected. Every institution that should destroy the black markets ends up entangled in them. And so, the rot spreads unchecked. The consequences extend far beyond economics. They shape culture itself. For many in the Underhive, the gang-provided food is more reliable than the Emperor's rations. For smugglers, loyalty to crew and profit replaces loyalty to Imperium. For nobles, alien luxuries become status symbols, markers of power and decadence. Over time, this corrodes the very identity of humanity under imperial rule. What should be a unified empire of the faithful becomes a patchwork of hidden allegiances, with entire populations looking to shadows for salvation rather than the Emperor's light. These are not isolated failures, they are systemic. They are the cost of governing a galaxy where scarcity is the norm and survival depends on compromise. The Imperium cannot afford to eradicate its black markets, but neither can it admit their necessity. Instead, it staggers forward, reliant on shadows, crippled by them, and forever vulnerable to the corruption they spread. To understand the full danger, however, we must follow these consequences beyond individual worlds and regiments. The black markets of the Imperium are not confined to hives and starships. They have galaxy-wide effects. They shape interstellar politics, empower heretical movements, and destabilize entire sectors. In the next step, we must examine how contraband moves not only through alleys and cargo holds, but across systems and sectors, knitting together a hidden web of trade that rivals the Imperium's own sanctioned networks. In the Imperium, everything is measured, documented, and taxed, or at least that is the ideal the Administratum claims to uphold. In reality, entire sectors run on paperwork forged in back rooms, stamped by corrupt clerks or simply ignored in the chaos of war. And so, black markets thrive not only on physical goods, but on the exchange of information and the manipulation of bureaucracy itself. Bribes can be as valuable as bullets. A forged imperial seal might be more precious than a plasma pistol. Those who learn to bend the endless tide of red tape to their advantage can amass fortunes, while those who get caught face torture, execution, or worse. This part of the black market world is less visible, but no less essential. It oils the gears that keep the more tangible forms of smuggling alive. Consider, for example, a hive city of the Segmentum Obscurus. The place is a labyrinth of manufactoria, hab blocks, and spire palaces stacked one atop the other. Millions of souls move through its levels every day, each transaction noted, each tithe extracted. But no system so vast can be perfect. Somewhere between the lower HAB districts and the middle levels of industry lies a network of record keepers, clerks, and scribes who are willing to adjust the ledgers in exchange for favors. They might erase shipments of raw materials from official logs, or reroute food supplies so that a gang or a merchant guild suddenly finds itself with more grain than it should. These adjustments rarely draw immediate attention. After all, the Imperium itself is so slow to respond that a missing shipment might not be noticed for years. But on the streets, those changes fuel underground trade, turning necessity into opportunity. Not all bureaucratic corruption is so quiet. There are entire worlds where local governors knowingly allow black markets to thrive, provided the profits eventually make their way into the ruling family's coffers. To the common worker, these gray markets appear almost legitimate. Stalls openly selling rationed goods, workshops that manufacture war gear without the Mechanicus's seal, or auction houses where relics of the past are sold under the guise of heirlooms. But behind this veneer of legitimacy lies the same corruption that would see an ordinary citizen executed. The only difference is scale. Small-time smugglers might be hanged for trading a single autogun, while planetary rulers can profit openly from black market arms races so long as they maintain their loyalty to the Imperium. Still, even those in power tread carefully. The Inquisition looms like a shadow over every deal, every shipment, every whispered contract. If a world's black market grows too brazen, it risks attracting unwanted scrutiny. The Inquisition does not distinguish between willing corruption and accidental oversight. A scribe who misfiles records and a governor who profits from smuggling are equally guilty in the eyes of the Emperor. That threat keeps many markets hidden, disguised beneath layers of misdirection. Traders might use false names, shifting locations, or coded signals to announce their presence. Customers are vetted, tested, and watched long before they are allowed entry. Entire underhive districts can function like secret marketplaces, but to the uninitiated, they appear nothing more than ruins and abandoned factories. Where goods cannot move openly, currency takes strange forms. Thrones, the Imperium's official currency, may be the most common, but in black markets, other exchanges often carry more weight. Ammunition can be used as money, with las packs or bolter shells serving as standard units of trade. Food, especially protein rations and clean water, becomes as valuable as any coin. And for those trading in the highest echelons, information becomes currency. A data slate carrying void ship schedules might be exchanged for an entire shipment of contraband. A whispered warning about an impending Arbit's raid could secure loyalty for life. This economy of shadows extends far beyond material needs. In some corners of the Imperium, services are traded just as eagerly as goods. A skilled medici willing to operate without notifying authorities becomes invaluable, patching up wounds or augmenting bodies without Mechanicus oversight. For gangs, mercenaries, or even noble families, such services are worth more than gold. Likewise, assassins and spies form part of this ecosystem, their skills bartered in hushed negotiations. A gang might trade weapons, not for money, but for the silent elimination of a rival. A merchant could pay with access to restricted docking bays instead of coin. These exchanges weave a web of obligation that binds entire communities together under the constant shadow of illegality. The warp itself occasionally becomes entangled in this economy. Psychers, tightly controlled by the Imperium and subject to constant scrutiny, can sometimes slip into black markets. Some are captured and enslaved, traded as living commodities. Others, desperate to hide from imperial authorities, offer their services to smugglers in exchange for protection. They might read the thoughts of buyers to ensure trustworthiness, or mask shipments from detection by authorities. Of course, this is dangerous work. Any unsanctioned psyker risks attracting the attention of demons, or worse. But desperation breeds risk, and black markets thrive on desperation. Technology plays an equally dangerous role. The Adeptus Mechanicus claims monopoly over all machinery. But black markets offer everything from laser guns modified without proper rights to cybernetic implants installed by heretic fleshsmiths. In some underhives, gangs flaunt crude augmetics purchased on the black market, the crude workmanship leaving them scarred but functional. These modifications are status symbols as much as tools, marking out those willing to skirt the Mechanicus's authority. At higher levels, rogue traders might traffic in xenotech, alien weapons or artifacts that can shift the balance of power on a world. To possess such items is to risk death at the hands of the Inquisition, but to sell them successfully is to earn enough wealth to vanish from imperial sight forever. Through all of this, the black market reveals itself not merely as an economic phenomenon, but as a mirror of imperial society. It reflects the needs, fears, and ambitions of billions. Where the Imperium starves its people, black markets feed them. Where the Imperium restricts knowledge, black markets spread it. Where the Imperium demands loyalty, black markets reward cunning and defiance. And yet, the two are inseparable. The Imperium's rigidity creates the very conditions that make black markets flourish. Without oppression, scarcity, and fear, there would be no need for such networks. In this way, black markets are both parasite and lifeline, illegal by definition, yet vital for survival. As we move deeper into this exploration, we must now look at the human stories behind these markets. Who risks everything to trade in forbidden goods? What drives a scribe, a gang leader, or a merchant to step beyond imperial law? To understand the black market fully, we must step into their lives, their choices, and the often terrible consequences that follow. The Imperium of Man is often imagined as an unshakable edifice, rigid in its hierarchies, relentless in its bureaucracy, and absolute in its faith. Yet the deeper one peers into its workings, the clearer it becomes that the black markets are not merely tolerated. They are embedded within the very fabric of its governance. To understand this, we must look at how entire regions, entire subsectors even, become dependent upon the undercurrents of shadow trade, and how that dependence subtly shifts the balance of imperial authority. At the level of the individual world, black markets often begin as desperate adaptations to scarcity. Food, medicine, or ammunition slip through the cracks, sold by smugglers who have bribed their way past customs officials or arranged shipments that never appear on official ledgers. Over time, however, this evolves from simple necessity into structural dependence. A hive world that relies upon smugglers for 20% of its grain, for instance, becomes vulnerable not only to famine, but to manipulation. Gangs and trade cartels who control these channels effectively hold a population hostage. A shipment withheld means starvation, riots, and collapse. The imperial governor, no matter how mighty his titles, finds himself at the mercy of unseen hands. This fragility compounds when we look beyond the local. A subsector that develops multiple interlocking networks of smuggling finds its entire economy quietly reshaped. Consider, for example, a war-torn frontier sector where shipping routes are under constant threat of pirate raids. Official convoys may be lost or delayed, but smugglers, faster, leaner, and unconcerned with regulations, fill the gap. Their vessels dart between warp storms and avoid patrols, bringing essential supplies where administratum fleets fail. In such an environment, the smugglers become indispensable. Planetary rulers, once sworn to absolute loyalty, must negotiate with criminals simply to keep their worlds alive. Here, the black market transforms from a parasitic growth into an alternate system of governance. It is in these environments that we see the rise of organizations that straddle the line between legality and heresy. Merchant guilds, rogue traders, and noble houses all find opportunity in shadow trade. A rogue trader with his warrant of trade can cloak outright smuggling in the legitimacy of sanctioned exploration. A noble house, eager to display wealth and power, may invest heavily in networks that supply forbidden luxuries. Over time, these alliances blur the boundaries of law itself. The Imperium, which claims to draw a clear line between the righteous and the heretical, must live with the reality that its most trusted agents are often its most prolific lawbreakers. And yet, these dynamics do not simply weaken the Imperium, they reshape it. Smuggling networks become conduits for information, enabling messages to pass between rebel groups, cults, or dissidents spread across star systems. A coded phrase hidden in a manifest might signal the beginning of an uprising. A shipment of weapons routed through 5 worlds might ensure that rebellion explodes on 6. The black markets do not merely sell, they connect. In doing so, they build a hidden web that rivals the official communication systems of the Imperium, one less efficient but more adaptive, less centralized but harder to destroy. The Imperial authorities are not blind to this. The Arbites, the Inquisition, and the Administratum all dedicate enormous resources to tracking and suppressing smuggling networks. But the scale of the Imperium is its own worst enemy. How can one police an empire of 1,000,000 worlds? Even where smugglers are caught, the impact is temporary. The destruction of one network only creates opportunities for another. Moreover, corruption infiltrates the enforcers themselves. Arbites commanders may take bribes to look the other way, or worse, may quietly run smuggling rings under the guise of cracking them down. In such cases, the line between law and crime does not merely blur, it disappears. The galaxy-wide consequences of this reality are profound. Wars are extended not because the Imperium lacks soldiers or weapons, but because supplies are siphoned away by smugglers. Epidemics spread further because black markets profit from counterfeit cures. Political unrest festers because shadow trade feeds the ambitions of cults and heretics. On a grand scale, this means that the Imperium is always fighting not one war, but 2. The open war against Xenos and heretics, and the hidden war against its own hunger for survival. This hidden war is perhaps most visible in the ports and void stations that dot Imperial space. These hubs, designed to regulate and oversee interstellar trade, inevitably become choke points where black markets flourish. A port administrator can make a fortune by misreporting docking schedules, allowing smugglers to pass unnoticed. A guild of voidfarers might agree to lose cargo in transit, only to resell it later. Even the void stations themselves may depend on contraband to survive, relying on smuggled goods to keep their air scrubbers running or their reactors supplied. Thus, the very arteries of Imperial commerce are laced with corruption, invisible until the moment they collapse. Perhaps most disturbingly, the black markets of the Imperium ensure that no frontier is ever truly secure. Where official convoys are too slow, smugglers carry alien relics, heretical tomes, and even living Xenos across the borders of Imperial space. In this way, enemies of humanity are carried into its very heart. A cult armed with smuggled bolters can destabilize an entire city. A governor swayed by alien luxuries can tilt a sector toward rebellion. The black markets are not only parasites feeding on the Imperium's weaknesses, they are vectors spreading corruption from world to world until even the strongest bastions of humanity rot from within. To understand the depth of this problem, we must now turn from the networks themselves to their architects. Who builds these systems? Who sustains them? And why? Behind every smuggler's vessel, every clandestine deal, stands someone who profits, or someone who believes they have no choice. The next step in our exploration is to uncover the syndicates, guilds, and cartels that shape the black markets into an empire of shadows parallel to the Imperium itself. In every shadow empire, there are architects, those who do not simply profit from crime, but who shape it, guide it, and bind its disparate elements into something enduring. Within the Imperium of man, where millions of planets spin under a single banner, yet rarely share more than scraps of communication, the black markets owe their permanence to syndicates, cartels, and guilds that operate like mirror images of the Imperium itself. To understand how the shadow economy thrives, one must understand the individuals and institutions that sustain it. At the lowest level are the gangs. They are the most visible manifestation of the black markets. Ragged groups of enforcers, smugglers, and thugs who control neighborhoods, hive levels, or isolated outposts. These gangs form the muscles of the trade, providing protection for shipments, intimidation for rivals, and violence for anyone who refuses to comply. Yet their role is not purely brute force. Many gangs maintain local networks of informants, street vendors, and corrupt officials who grease the wheels of contraband exchange. In a hive city of billions, a gang controlling a single freight elevator or transport hub can wield influence over tens of thousands of lives. Above these gangs are the cartels, organizations with a scope that crosses entire cities, continents, or worlds. A cartel might specialize in one form of contraband, food, medical supplies, or weaponry, or diversify across multiple avenues of shadow trade. Unlike gangs, cartels often possess fleets of ships, entire hidden manufactoria, or even off-world contacts that secure their dominance. They operate more like corporations than criminal mobs, issuing contracts, enforcing quality, and brokering large-scale deals. In some sectors, cartels are so firmly entrenched that they negotiate openly with planetary governors, presenting themselves not as criminals, but as indispensable service providers. Above the cartels are the guilds, shadow institutions that resemble the sanctioned trade organizations of the Imperium, yet remain outside its official structure. Smugglers' guilds, voidfarer guilds, and rogue trading consortia bind together smaller groups, providing unity and common codes that allow them to resist imperial crackdowns. Some maintain their own written laws, passed down through generations, with penalties ranging from exile to ritual execution for members who betray their trust. The guilds often blend seamlessly with legitimate organizations, owning shipping yards, merchant fleets, or noble-sponsored enterprises that act as cover for illegal dealings. What makes these guilds especially dangerous is their adaptability. While the Imperium enforces rigidity, the guilds thrive on fluidity. If a crackdown sweeps through a sector, they reroute their trade lines. If Arbites destroy one network, the guilds simply absorb its remnants into another. This resilience ensures that black markets are never truly destroyed, only reshaped. To the common citizen, it feels less like criminality and more like inevitability. If one smuggler disappears, another will arrive to take his place. At the highest levels, the architects of the shadow economy are often indistinguishable from the Imperium's own elite. Rogue traders, noble houses, and even certain administratum officials can become linchpins of smuggling empires. A rogue trader's warrant provides the perfect shield, allowing him to legally transport alien relics or forbidden technologies under the pretense of exploration. A noble house may sponsor entire fleets of smugglers, not out of desperation, but out of greed, seeing contraband as a faster route to power than sanctioned trade. Administratum officials, tasked with overseeing tithe schedules, may manipulate records to disguise missing shipments, funneling them into hidden markets. These are not mere criminals, they are shadow governors, rulers of parallel systems of wealth and authority. The relationships between gangs, cartels, guilds, and elites are not static. They shift constantly, creating a living hierarchy of shadow power. A cartel may rise to prominence under the patronage of a noble house, only to collapse when that house is purged. A rogue trader might ally with a guild to secure exotic goods, then betray it to the Arbites to eliminate competition. This instability breeds paranoia, but it also prevents total collapse. For every betrayal, a new alliance forms. For every destroyed syndicate, another emerges from its ashes. The shadow economy is thus both fragile and immortal, forever threatened yet forever reborn. It is tempting to imagine these networks as chaotic, but in reality, they exhibit surprising structure. A smuggler operating in one subsector will often know the symbols, passwords, and customs of dozens of different organizations, allowing him to navigate the underworld with precision. Cartels and guilds issue tokens of trust, rings, seals, or digital codes that act as credentials. Deals are often concluded with elaborate rituals, ensuring that betrayal becomes not only a financial risk, but a sacrilege. These codes bind together a culture of smuggling that rivals the religious devotion of the Imperium itself. Where the Imperium enforces unity through faith in the Emperor, the shadow economy enforces unity through faith in trade. The creed of the black markets is simple: survival, profit, and secrecy. To break that creed is to invite annihilation, whether at the hands of imperial forces or one's own peers. In this way, the black markets cultivate their own version of loyalty, one rooted not in piety, but in pragmatism. Perhaps the most revealing aspect of these shadow organizations is their intergenerational continuity. Just as noble houses pass down titles, many smuggling guilds pass down leadership within families. A son may inherit not only his father's ship, but also his father's network of contacts and debts. Over centuries, these dynasties of shadow trade grow as enduring as any sanctioned institution. To an outsider, they appear as criminal families. To those within, they are clans, bound by blood and trade, as legitimate in their eyes as any noble lineage. The impact of these organizations is not confined to economics. They shape culture, politics, and even faith. In worlds where the Adeptus Ministorum struggles to maintain influence, guilds and cartels often fill the void. They sponsor festivals, provide food during shortages, and enforce their own codes of justice. Citizens who rely upon them for survival begin to view them not as criminals, but as protectors. In time, devotion to the Emperor can blur with devotion to the Guild, creating a dual allegiance that the Imperium can never fully extinguish. Thus, the architects of the black markets reveal the truth of the Imperium, that its unity is a veneer, and beneath that veneer lies 1,000 competing sovereignties. For every imperial governor, there is a shadow governor. For every sanctioned guild, there is a secret one. And for every tithe fleet that carries supplies to Terra, there is a smuggler fleet siphoning those supplies into the veins of the underworld. To grasp the true scope of their influence, however, we must look not only at how these organizations sustain themselves, but at how they extend their reach across the stars. For the shadow economy of the Imperium is not limited to individual worlds or even sectors. It stretches across the galaxy itself, a web of hidden routes and coded agreements, binding together an empire beneath the Emperor's empire. And so, our exploration moves outward, from the gang and the cartel, from the guild and the noble house, to the interstellar arteries of smuggling that bind the Imperium together in shadows. The shadow economy of Warhammer 40K is not solely a matter of illicit commerce and criminal governance. At its heart lies a complex web of corruption and complicity, a network that reaches far beyond the underhive or the dockside warehouse, stretching its tendrils into the very institutions meant to uphold imperial law. What makes black markets in the Imperium so enduring is not simply their ability to hide, but their ability to involve those tasked with destroying them. Consider the Adeptus Arbites, the Imperium's judicial hammer, feared across 1,000 worlds. To most citizens, the Arbites are incorruptible, faceless enforcers of the Lex Imperialis, executing the Emperor's law without hesitation or mercy. And yet, history in the 41st millennium has shown countless instances where Arbites precincts themselves fall to corruption. A single arbitrator accepting bribes to look the other way can allow an entire smuggling network to thrive. Sometimes, the Arbites themselves become active participants, justifying their actions as controlled infiltration or necessary funding for their precinct. Other times, they are simply overwhelmed by the reality that their fortress courthouses cannot fight the tide alone. The administratum, too, plays its part. On countless worlds, black markets flourish not in defiance of imperial bureaucracy, but because of it. Paperwork errors, misfiled tithes, and false manifests are opportunities for smugglers. More disturbingly, administrative officials may engineer these errors deliberately, creating gaps in supply chains that only the black markets can fill for a price. Some scribes, drowning in quotas, actively rely on smuggling networks to make sure shipments of food, promethium, or munitions arrive on time. To them, this is not treason, but survival. The system itself is so inefficient, so riddled with inefficiency, that only shadow trade keeps it functioning. Then there is the Adeptus Mechanicus, whose needs and desires are more esoteric. To the Martian priesthood, knowledge is the most valuable of commodities. Black markets in the underhives of forge worlds often thrive not on weapons or narcotics, but on forbidden STC fragments, lost data slates, or unsanctioned machine spirits. Tech adepts might pay smugglers handsomely for relics of ancient technology, circumventing Mechanicus orthodoxy. In some cases, these smugglers become indispensable partners. The Mechanicus cannot openly traffic in blasphemous devices, but through black markets, they gain access while keeping their hands clean. The ecclesiarchy, too, is not immune. The worship of the emperor is absolute, yet faith is not always pure. Relics, bones, fragments of parchment, sacred oils circulate in shadow markets as eagerly as drugs or weapons. Some are genuine, others are forgeries, but all fetch high prices from pilgrims desperate for a fragment of holiness. Priests themselves have been caught trafficking relics, sometimes believing that even counterfeit objects can inspire faith, other times enriching themselves under the guise of service. The Ministorum may thunder against such heresies, but in practice, these trades are often tolerated when they maintain zeal among the masses. Corruption does not stop with the great institutions. Noble houses, as we discussed earlier, frequently patronize or control black markets. But even the Imperial Guard, the very soldiers of the Emperor, can become entangled. Guardsmen are notorious for trading in contraband, weapons scavenged from the battlefield, xenos, trinkets pried from corpses, rations and supplies diverted for sale. Some regiments even operate semi-official black markets within their ranks, tolerated by officers so long as discipline is maintained. The harsh truth is that an army of millions requires constant lubrication of morale, and sometimes that lubrication comes in the form of illegal goods. The complicity extends still further. Entire planetary governors may turn a blind eye to black markets, or even foster them deliberately. The imperial tithe is vast, and governors often struggle to meet its demands. By allowing smugglers to operate freely, they ensure a constant influx of resources, luxuries, and bribes. When the Arbites or Inquisition arrive to investigate, carefully arranged records present an image of compliance, while the true currents of trade flow unseen beneath the surface. Yet, of all these forms of corruption, perhaps the most dangerous is the Inquisition itself. While many inquisitors wage war against the shadow economy, others have been known to exploit it. Some see black markets as a convenient means of obtaining information or seizing otherwise inaccessible relics. A radical inquisitor may not balk at dealing with smugglers if it means acquiring a Xenos artifact that could one day save a sector from destruction. Of course, in such dealings, the line between using the shadow economy and becoming part of it is perilously thin. This deep corruption reveals a fundamental truth. In the Imperium, black markets are not truly outside the system. They are interwoven with it. The Adeptus Arbites may police them, but Arbites themselves may be on a smuggler's payroll. The Administratum may regulate them, yet its scribes often rely on their existence. The Mechanicus may condemn them, but quietly makes use of their discoveries. The Ecclesiarchy may denounce them, even as priests traffic in relics. The Guard may fight for order while trading in contraband. And even the Inquisition, meant to purge corruption, sometimes feeds from the same trough. This reality creates a paradox. Officially, the Imperium insists on purity, on law, on absolute obedience. Unofficially, it is sustained by compromise, by corruption, by the gray economy. Without black markets, many worlds would collapse. Without smugglers, armies might starve. Without contraband, cults might rise faster than the Arbites could suppress them. The Emperor's realm, vast and crumbling, survives not only through faith and force, but through the very criminality it claims to despise. And in this lies the enduring strength of the shadow economy. Because it is not just tolerated, it is necessary. And when corruption becomes necessity, eradication becomes impossible. The black markets of the Imperium thrive not despite the institutions of power, but because of them. As we move forward, it becomes important to ask, what are the consequences of this corruption? What happens when a system designed to be absolute, incorruptible, and divine is secretly built on deals, bribes, and shadows? The answer, as history has shown, can be catastrophic, not only for individual worlds, but for the Imperium as a whole. In the next stage of our exploration, we will turn to the impact of black markets on imperial society itself. From the common citizen to the planetary elite, from the guardsman to the rogue trader, we will examine how shadow trade shapes the daily realities of life in the 41st millennium. For the common citizen, often referred to as a hab dweller or hive rat, black markets are less a matter of choice than of necessity. The Imperium provides what it can, but its tithes strip planets bare, and its distribution systems are notoriously erratic. Food shipments vanish into bureaucratic voids. Medical supplies are redirected to war fronts. Replacement parts for machinery arrive decades late, if at all. In such a system, survival requires bending the rules. To the average worker, the black market is not criminality. It is the only place to secure food for their family, medicine for a sick child, or tools for repairing failing machinery. Without smugglers, countless citizens would perish long before the Arbites ever noticed their absence. This dependence breeds a culture of silent acceptance. Citizens know the location of unmarked stalls tucked beneath transit platforms or behind false walls in hab blocks. They know which vendors to trust and which to avoid. Some pass down this knowledge through generations, teaching their children where to find real medicine instead of watered-down substitutes, or which relics to purchase to ward off sickness and misfortune. In such places, black market vendors are not seen as criminals, but as essential providers. For many, faith in the Emperor exists side by side with faith in the shadow merchants who keep them alive. Among the middle strata of imperial society, artisans, scribes, and minor functionaries, the role of the black market takes on a different flavor. Here, contraband is not only about survival, but also about advancement. A mid-ranking clerk may pay smugglers for rare ink, parchment, or data slates that allow him to complete quotas ahead of rivals. A mechanic may secretly purchase off-world tools that vastly outperform sanctioned, Mechanicus-issued equipment. A scribe, desperate to maintain status, may even buy counterfeit noble sigils to pass himself off as more important than he truly is. These purchases, though illicit, grant advantages in a society where competition is often as lethal as open war. At the upper layers of society, black markets provide not necessities, but luxuries. Noble houses and planetary elites, insulated from the worst scarcities, seek instead that which the Imperium denies them. Forbidden foods from agri-worlds, narcotics harvested from alien biomes, even Xenos artifacts that promise beauty or power far beyond imperial manufacture. To the nobility, engaging with smugglers is not simply greed, but also a statement of superiority. They view themselves as above imperial law, entitled to goods denied to the masses. Some houses flaunt their shadow acquisitions during feasts or ceremonies, their very indulgence a quiet rebellion against the strictures of the Imperium. The black markets also shape the culture of the Imperial Guard. Life as a guardsman is brutal, and morale is a commodity as precious as ammunition. Regiments on campaign develop thriving internal economies, often semi-tolerated by their commanders. Cigarettes, LHO sticks, amasec, charms, and battlefield loot circulate freely, exchanged between soldiers as currency. Black marketeers follow armies like carrion birds, ensuring steady flows of contraband into the camps. To an officer, such exchanges may seem trivial, But to the common soldier, they are lifelines, moments of respite in wars that consume entire lifetimes. In some regiments, it is said that the unofficial black market is more reliable than the official commissariat. Smugglers themselves form a culture apart. Their lives are precarious, marked by constant risk of betrayal, capture, or execution. Yet, they also enjoy a strange sort of respect. In many societies, smugglers are celebrated in whispered stories, portrayed as daring rogues who outwit the Imperium and provide for the poor. Children in hive depths may grow up idolizing them as heroes, not criminals. Over time, this mythologizing creates a shadow folklore, songs, symbols, and secret handshakes that reinforce smuggler identity. While the Imperium claims to be the sole source of meaning and devotion, these underground cultures provide their own form of belonging, one rooted not in faith, but in shared survival. The psychological impact of this system is profound. Citizens live double lives, outwardly professing loyalty to the Emperor while inwardly navigating the markets that the Imperium officially condemns. A pilgrim may buy a forged relic while praying sincerely to the Emperor. A guardsman may smuggle Xenos trinkets in his pack while fighting in his name. A noble may host a sermon in his chapel while feasting on contraband luxuries. This duality becomes second nature. To be an imperial citizen is to live with contradiction, to speak piety while surviving through shadow. The black markets also drive inequality. Those who can afford better goods, nobles, wealthy scribes, rogue traders, thrive, while the poor rely on diluted, dangerous substitutes. A child in a lower hive may receive counterfeit medicine that barely delays death, while a noble in his spire enjoys genuine treatments imported illegally from across the sector. This disparity fuels resentment, sometimes mutating into rebellion. Many cults and insurrectionist movements find their earliest recruits among those who feel cheated by black markets, those who know they are being forced to buy scraps, while others feast on the forbidden. Ironically, such cults themselves often depend on black markets to arm and supply their uprisings, completing the circle of dependence and exploitation. On some worlds, the shadow economy becomes so integral that it defines the culture of the planet itself. In the underhives of Necromunda, trade in contraband is indistinguishable from normal life. Every gang, guild, and clan participates openly. In frontier worlds, smugglers often serve as the only consistent link to the greater Imperium, bringing news, supplies, and technologies where official channels fail. To the inhabitants of such worlds, black markets are not parasitic. They are the arteries through which the planet survives. Without them, there would be nothing. The cumulative effect is staggering. Across billions of worlds, the black market shapes everything from diet to religion, from morale to politics. It is the unseen force binding the Imperium together where bureaucracy fails. And yet, this very dependence breeds vulnerability. For every citizen who relies upon contraband to survive, there is also the risk of exploitation, corruption, and betrayal. The shadow trade offers life, but it also offers chains. Chains of debt, chains of addiction, chains of secrecy that bind entire populations to their unseen masters. This paradox of survival entwined with subjugation defines the lived reality of the 41st millennium. Black markets are not anomalies to be rooted out. They are lifelines, cultures, and cages all at once. As we move forward, we must examine how this paradox translates into instability. For when entire societies are built upon shadows, the potential for collapse or catastrophe lurks ever near. And in the galaxy of Warhammer 40K, catastrophe is never far away. The resilience of the Imperium's black markets lies not only in their ubiquity, but in the paradoxical way they serve both rebellion and stability. On one hand, the shadow economy undermines imperial authority, fostering lawlessness, corruption, and contact with forbidden knowledge. On the other, it provides the very lifeblood that keeps populations compliant, preventing collapse when official channels fail. It is within this paradox that one sees how deeply the markets are woven into the political fabric of the 41st millennium. At the planetary level, governors and local administrations often rely upon these unsanctioned exchanges more than they admit. A governor whose world is overdue on tithes may quietly tolerate smuggling to maintain production quotas. Guildmasters may divert shipments lost in transit to black market distributors in order to keep workers alive or armies supplied. Even within the adeptus administratum, clerks who are supposed to stamp out contraband instead become customers themselves. In practice, black markets serve as the lubricant in the gears of imperial bureaucracy, allowing it to continue turning even as it grinds down its subjects. The Adeptus Arbits, sworn enforcers of imperial law, understand this contradiction better than most. Entire precincts are devoted to crushing smuggling rings, raiding illicit manufactoria, and burning heretical relics by the cartload. Arbits raids are brutal affairs, often broadcast publicly to remind the masses of the Emperor's law. Yet these victories are rarely decisive. The Arbites can destroy one network, but another rises immediately, often with the quiet tolerance of local elites. Some Arbites choose to look the other way, reasoning that stability is better served by limited tolerance than by total war against every shadow trader. Others take bribes, their armor polished while their honor corrodes. In either case, the black market persists, adapting as swiftly as the Imperium strikes. The Mechanicus occupies an uneasy position in this web of shadow commerce. As guardians of technology, they are sworn to root out unsanctioned devices and purge the heresy of innovation. Yet their monopoly creates demand for precisely what they suppress. Across the galaxy, smugglers thrive by selling unauthorized modifications, salvaged standard template construct fragments, or Xenos technology disguised as relics. Tech priests decry these practices, but it is not unheard of for a desperate Magos or a renegade Forge clan to engage in illicit trade themselves, quietly supplying contraband tools or knowledge when official channels fail. The paradox is striking. In a galaxy where the worship of technology has become religion, heretical devices often circulate more freely than sanctioned ones. The Inquisition represents the greatest existential threat to the shadow economy, for its agents are not bound by planetary law or local politics. When Inquisitors suspect that black markets harbor heresy, mutation, or Xenos taint, they act with ruthless efficiency. Traders vanish, guilds are purged, entire districts burn to ash. And yet, even the Inquisition is not immune to contradiction. Some Inquisitors employ smugglers as informants or assets, leveraging their networks to uncover cults or trace heretical shipments. Others exploit shadow economies to acquire rare materials for their own secretive purposes. For the Inquisition, the black market is both a battlefield and a tool, a dangerous yet sometimes indispensable resource. The ecclesiarchy, too, finds itself entangled. Preachers rail against the sins of indulgence, condemning narcotics, unsanctioned relics, and luxuries brought through illicit means. At the same time, churches themselves sometimes survive on shadow donations, gifts from traders who launder their wealth through the coffers of faith. Relics deemed fraudulent by the Ministorum may still circulate in pilgrim markets, purchased by the faithful who care less for authenticity than for hope. In this way, black markets bleed into religion itself, reshaping the lived faith of billions of imperial citizens. This interweaving of institutions reveals why shadow economies are not easily dismantled. They do not exist apart from the Imperium. They exist within it, sustained by its inefficiencies and contradictions. Every law that forbids something creates a demand for its acquisition. Every tithe that drains a world creates scarcity that must be filled. Every delay in bureaucratic supply chains gives smugglers an opening to deliver what the Imperium cannot. To speak of black markets in the 41st millennium is not to speak of external parasites gnawing at imperial order, but of a second circulatory system, hidden veins and arteries that carry resources through a body too bloated and clumsy to manage itself. Yet this hidden circulatory system carries with it toxins. Corruption spreads through every official it touches, hollowing out institutions from within. Soldiers who rely on black marketeers may lose discipline. Nobles who indulge in forbidden luxuries risk exposure to heretical influences. Administrators who accept bribes become compromised, their loyalty no longer to the emperor, but to profit. Over time, entire planetary governments have been known to collapse under the weight of their dependence on shadow trade. When the web of corruption is pulled too tight, it snaps, and when it does, rebellion, heresy, or invasion often follow. Consider the case of Gathalamor, a shrine world once famed for its unyielding devotion. There, noble houses secretly trafficked in Xenos narcotics, justifying their indulgence as a symbol of wealth and power. Over decades, their decadence eroded discipline within the local ecclesiarchy. When chaos cults infiltrated the smuggling networks, the nobles were too compromised to resist. What began as a hidden indulgence ended in open rebellion, the planet burning until it was scoured by the Inquisition. Gathalamor stands as a reminder that every indulgence in the shadow market carries with it the risk of corruption far beyond the individual. At the same time, the Imperium cannot eliminate black markets without crippling itself. To close them entirely would be to starve billions, to deprive armies of supplies, to bring factories to a standstill. In this sense, the shadow economy mirrors the Imperium itself, contradictory, brutal, and self-defeating, yet enduring across millennia. The black market is a mirror of imperial reality, harsh, unfair, and precarious, but impossible to live without. As we look to the future, the question is not whether the black markets of the 41st millennium will survive. They are as inevitable as hunger and as resilient as greed. The question is how they will evolve in the face of growing instability. With each passing century, the Imperium fractures further, its grip on its worlds weakening. In this growing darkness, shadow economies may well become the true backbone of survival, far more reliable than the official decrees of a distant, crumbling bureaucracy. The paradox deepens. The very forces that sustain the Imperium also corrode it from within. To understand this is to glimpse the fragile balance upon which the galaxy rests. For in a universe of endless war, scarcity, and fear, the shadows are not merely a refuge. They are the foundation upon which daily life is built. And as the Imperium stumbles further into crisis, those foundations may prove more powerful and more dangerous than anyone dares to admit. In the end, the black markets of the Warhammer 40,000 universe are not a curiosity or a side note to Imperial life. They are an inevitable byproduct of a society built on repression, secrecy, and survival against impossible odds. Every regulation, every tithe, every restriction placed upon humanity by the Imperium creates an equal and opposite reaction, a hunger for the forbidden, the illicit, and the hidden. In this sense, the shadow economy is less a rebellion against the Imperium and more a reflection of it. The Imperium demands loyalty, obedience, and sacrifice. The black markets offer pragmatism, adaptation, and the possibility of survival. Where the Imperium says no, the black markets whisper yes, but at a price. The story of these hidden exchanges is not just about contraband goods or illicit fortunes. It is about the people who risk everything to operate in the shadows. The ganger, standing guard at a hive entrance, paid not in coin, but in stolen rations. The smuggler captain who risks warp storms and Xenos raiders to deliver a cargo of medica supplies to a world the Administratum has already written off as lost. The noble house that enriches itself through quiet sponsorship of cartels, gambling that the Inquisition's gaze will remain elsewhere. Each of them plays a role in sustaining the unseen empire that overlays the official one, a second Imperium, unrecognized but deeply influential. It is tempting to imagine that such a structure might collapse under its own contradictions. After all, How can a galaxy that champions absolute order tolerate the constant hum of illegal trade beneath its surface? Yet, history suggests that this duality is precisely what allows the Imperium to endure. For every market stall hidden in the depths of a hive, for every smuggler's den carved into the flank of a void station, there is an imperial governor or munitorum officer who quietly benefits from its existence. Some are complicit for profit, others for necessity, but the result is the same. The black markets persist not in spite of the Imperium, but because of it. When we look closely at this hidden world, we see its paradoxical nature. On one level, the black markets are criminal, exploitative, and dangerous. They empower warlords, nourish heretical cults, and spread forbidden technology. Yet on another, they are lifelines, feeding the hungry, arming the defenseless, and preserving knowledge the Imperium would otherwise burn. This is the uncomfortable truth. The black markets are both poison and cure, parasite and host, a shadow system that keeps the official system from collapsing entirely under its own weight. What does this mean for the ordinary citizen of the Imperium? For many, it means life itself, the chance to purchase food when the ration lines run dry, the possibility of finding medicine when plague sweeps through a hablock, the opportunity to secure a weapon in a world where the only law is the strength of one's blade or the number of friends with guns at their side. To such citizens, the black markets are not an abstract concept. They are as real and as essential as the air they breathe, even if speaking of them aloud might mean a swift and brutal punishment. For the Inquisition, the Arbites, and the Ecclesiarchy, this presents an eternal challenge. To stamp out the shadow economy entirely would be impossible without dismantling the Imperium itself. To tolerate it openly would undermine the very principles the Imperium is built upon. Thus, they pursue a delicate and often hypocritical balance, cracking down when power must be demonstrated, ignoring when survival depends upon silence. The black markets endure in the space between these extremes, thriving in the gaps left by dogma and decree. And so, the cycle continues. As long as the Imperium exists, its black markets will persist. They will adapt, transform, and reappear in new guises whenever the torchlight of authority grows too bright. They are, in their way, as eternal as the stars themselves, an endless reminder that no matter how absolute an empire claims to be, humanity will always find ways to bend, to break, and to survive. The next time you picture the galaxy of the 41st millennium, do not only imagine the vast armies clashing on 1,000 battlefields, or the great cathedral ships of the Ecclesiarchy blazing with holy fire. Imagine also the quiet exchange of hands in a shadowed alley, the whispered bargain struck beneath a failing lumen globe, the unseen flow of goods that keeps whole worlds alive. For in those forgotten transactions, hidden beneath the banners of the Imperium, lies the truest measure of humanity's will to endure. That is the reality of black markets in Warhammer 40K, not a story of rebellion alone, nor of corruption alone, but of survival, a shadow empire beneath an empire of shadows. And in the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, it may be that such shadows are the only light many will ever know.